Welcome to the latest edition of Your Money This Week, my regular Friday rundown of the top personal finance and money news stories. To help me do it this week, I am joined by Simon Reed. He's a personal finance journalist, used to be the editor of the finance section at The Independent, now writes for the likes of the BBC, The Mirror, The Sun, all sorts of different publications. This week, a load of stories to go through, including the latest Sunday Times rich list. Cinemas have reopened. How have they gone down? Potential shortages for building works and DIY, and much, much more. Hope you enjoy. Simon, thank you so much for coming back on to Cash Chats, another Your Money This Week, helping me break down a lot of the big news stories of the last 7 days. And because you've been working on the news desk, you've been covering a lot of these. This can make my job so much easier this week round.
I tell you, the one thing about working on a news desk is there are so many stories you have to look at, and a lot of them don't get written for obvious reasons, i.e. there's a limit to the space. So, I can spend half an hour, finding out about a story, doing some research and not actually doing any work on it. So it does sometimes mean even half an hour after the story's published, I'm onto something else. I can't actually remember the facts about something that I wrote an hour ago. That's the nature of the beast.
It is. I sometimes find the same thing actually, that when I've doing this podcast interview with you now, and then I'll record the top and the bottom afterwards. And at the top, I can't always remember the stories we've covered half an hour ago. So I feel you there. I know what you're saying. But there were a couple of stories that you did cover this week about shortages, very, very different types of shortages. But that was an interesting theme for the week. Maybe we start off with one of those. And this first one is around building projects and how people might be struggling, whether it's a bigger job, a bigger renovation, or even just some simple DIY. They might struggle to get it done or to a reasonable price.
Yeah, it's there's a whole lot of factors that are coming into play here, but it essentially means if you go to your local DIY store and hope to pick up some wood or cement or something, you're either going to be completely out of luck, or you're going to find that prices have doubled. It's just a really, really hard. It's partly a consequence of Brexit, partly a consequence of the pandemic, partly a consequence of some of the shipping delays we've seen this year. But the main big change that's caused this has been this sort of unlocking of lockdown. And suddenly people have rushed out from March onwards, and building companies to get on with work. So the demand, not just in the UK, all over the world, the demand for all these goods has really shot up, which means there really is a paucity of supply. I mean, I've spoken to some people and they just said, anyone who's thinking about doing some DIY or home improvements, just put it on hold, because you won't be able to get the stuff, or you're going to be charged too much, or you won't be able to get the workers, because the demand for them, of course, is really high. So give it up for the summer, enjoy the summer, and maybe try again in the autumn.
Because this is one of those things, it sort of links in. You talk about some of the stories you see coming through, and we get the same ones. And one of those is around housing prices. There's always a new story. House prices are on the increase. They're getting higher and higher. And that has also prompted lots of people to go, right, well, we'll stay put then. We can't afford to move. And we'll do the renovations. We're spending more time at home because of the pandemic, and maybe our work's going to change. So let's make this the best it can possibly be. But it sounds like even that's going to be a bit of a kind of a setback there as well.
Yeah, well, frankly, unless you booked in your tradespeople, I play football with a couple of tradespeople, and they say they're booked up really right through until Christmas now. People ring up saying, "Oh, great, we want to do this patio, whatever it is," and they've been told, "Well, there's no one around until maybe next spring." It's I don't think it's a major problem, because if you're planning home improvements, normally they're just to give yourself a bit more space or to make things a bit nicer. So if you have to delay it 6 months, 9 months, well, so what?
Yeah. Do you know, it's one of those things. It used to be. I mean, the thing that I always struggle is finding a good tradesman and know when they're good. From an electrician to a plumber to builders to joiners to whatever it is, it's always a struggle. But it used to be a kind of, what if they're booked up, they must be good. That's obviously not necessarily the case now either. So even harder for people to find the right person, but hopefully they will. The other shortage is a very, very different shortage, and it involves something which you could possibly, I think, turn to if you're lacking in building materials, and that is Weetabix.
I think it's probably a bit too porous.
Yeah, maybe. Sturdy stuff though, sturdy things. There is the warning that we could see a shortage of Weetabix this year. Very different to the 99 flake shortage we mentioned a few weeks ago, which was simply they didn't produce enough. This has sort of bigger connotations in terms of, well, workers' rights, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's all about workers' rights. There's been a thing which has come in the last couple of years. It's called hire and refire. Now, British Airways was going through this process last year, most of last year, and for big companies, what they want to do is to effectively sack the whole workforce and rehire them on less good pay and everything else. And of course, this is terrible for workers. So they often demanded they've got to do work more and earn less, and that's just not right. Now, the Weetabix have been accused of doing the same. The G&B union have said they really are taking workers for a ride. Workers are not happy about it, so they're balloting right now. And if the ballots go ahead, they will strike, which means there will be a shortage of Weetabixes this time. Now, there's two sides to the story. Of course, any company producing any goods has to work out, can we afford to do this? And what they're saying is, well, we need to cut our workers' costs. But I'm afraid I don't have a lot of sympathy with that. If you can't produce your goods without paying people a fair and reasonable rate and giving them the holidays and the pension and all the other benefits, then really you're not running a business properly. So I'm all behind the workers. If we have to go without our Weetabix, although my son, who likes to have two every morning, I'm quite happy. He'll cry about that, but well, tough, I think. We've got to fight for workers' rights.
Yeah, and you say in your report that some of these new contracts could be worth up to £5,000 less a year. I mean, that's a substantial amount. It's really, really sort of can have a big impact on some people, and we are seeing this, as you say, more and more right now, and it's a worrying trend. I think that this kind of doesn't really matter. We gave you that contract; it means nothing now. You either take this new one or on your bike. It's definitely one to sort of keep an eye on and see where things go. But there has been some good news this week when it comes to trade unions, hasn't there? And this comes down to to the gig economy and Uber.
Yeah, well, Uber, as we know, have come in for a lot of criticism in the 6 or 7 years they've been in the UK. It might be a bit longer, but there was a 5-year court case for workers to claim the right to be called workers. Uber said, oh no, they're all freelancers. All the drivers who use are freelancers. Therefore, they don't have any rights at all. They get their money, and it's up to them to sort out the tax and everything else. Now, a 5-year court case. Eventually, the judges agreed with the workers that actually, of course, they're employees. They take the jobs from Uber. They have to use the app. They can't do what they like. They have to work these hours and that hours. So eventually, Uber lost the court case. So it granted some basic workers' rights, holidays, and some pension rights and so forth. But now, and it's just announced this week, they've agreed to recognise a union, the G&B union. Yes, it is the G&B union, which means that the union will have the right to negotiate on behalf of workers. We know that collective bargaining is much better for workers. When someone tries to negotiate on their own, say they want more pay, it's very easy for bosses to say, well, we can't afford to pay it. But if the union gets involved, they know how much everyone's paid, they know what the going rate is, and they can ensure that companies don't treat people badly. I'm a great union man. I believe in workers' rights. And it's great that Uber have finally agreed to do this in the UK. Interestingly enough, they're not doing it anywhere else in the world as yet. But I'm hoping that this will become an affection and we'll get other workers across the world getting some rights, because we can't have bosses telling workers when they can work, how much they're going to get paid. It's got to be, with the workers' agreement. And for most firms, particularly a firm like Uber, which claims to be a technology company, but it's reliant on its workforce, on its drivers. Without the drivers, it's nothing. So it needs to return that goodwill and that loyalty by giving them fair terms.
Yeah, that's a message also that was echoed in a global day of action this week about Amazon and the supply chain there. Again, that kind of thing, without the people making the materials, without the people driving constantly for days and days and days to get things from warehouse to warehouse, they wouldn't have that product. And although I think they do recognise unions here in the UK, there obviously was a big case just, I think, either earlier this month or late last month in the States where they were trying to unionise and voting to try and get unions into Amazon warehouses, but it didn't go through, and Amazon was accused of some, bullying tactics, essentially, in order to try and intimidate its workers not to vote for unions. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see, again, if this Uber thing is replicated elsewhere and how that affects the wider workers' movement, I suppose, and workers' rights.
I think it's absolutely right. Amazon is a huge company, and they have been putting a lot out about how frightening unions are. and it's quite easy to prey on people's fears. But at the bottom line, the union is all about helping us all collectively. They're not bully boys, trying to destroy capitalism. They're there to help ensure that everyone is treated fairly.
It's an interesting one. I did a year in California when I was a student, so we're going back over 20 years now. And one of the classes I did there was 1930s history or 1920s history. I can't quite remember what it was now. Again, it was a long time ago. But it was one of the questions that the teacher asked was, how many of you would consider, again, talking about the sort of late 20s, early 30s, probably the 20s actually, how many of you consider going to a meeting of a socialist party just about workers' rights? And the only people who raised their hands were the European students in the class. None of the Americans did, because there's that long history of socialism being seen as a dirty word. And I do worry a little bit how much that has also transferred over here to the UK politics, particularly over the last few years. And it's equated with something which isn't actually what it is. When we talk about workers' rights, as you say, this isn't talk about, it's really about making sure there is a fair deal for workers. So definitely one to keep an eye on there. Sticking with Amazon very, very briefly, obviously Amazon has done incredibly well during the pandemic, increasing their sales all the time. The big sort of UK retailer that has over the years managed to weather a lot of the storm, M&S, that's announced that it's kind of suffered big losses. Probably not unexpected, but it's going to see some job closures. I mean, so it's some store closures, isn't it, in the next sort of few months?
Yeah, it's going to be. In fact, it's actually 100 stores are actually closing, although only 30 are sort of disappearing and the other 70 are being displaced. Now, M&S has had, no matter how much people have a fondness for it, they haven't been shopping at M&S enough. So the store's been really struggling. What saved it largely over the past year during the pandemic has been its deal with Ocado and boosting up its delivery. I'm quite a fan of M&S. We've got one around the corner, so I shop there quite a lot. We're quite blessed where I live. We've got 3 big supermarket chains within a couple of 100 yards. So I tend to move around and get the get the best deals I can find from each one. But it has to change. M&S. It's lost its way. Store closures are very sad, but how many of us now are relying more on deliveries? We never used to. I quite like going to stores, testing out the fruit and that kind of stuff. But during the pandemic, we couldn't, so we turned to deliveries. And you know what? Having a big shop every week, turning up on your door, is much more convenient than going to a store and doing all that. So that's what we do now. And I'm sure plenty of other people have moved their lifestyle onto having the delivery, which means there's not so much demand for the high street shops. So we'll see more going, or more turning into destination points. So we've seen in the last few weeks deals with, I think it was Sainsbury's with Colucci's, was it? Tesco with Pret, so that you have coffee branches opening in these stores, which means when you go there, part of it will be, meet your friend for a coffee in a nice location with decent food, and that's what they're having to do now, turn them into destination events. So you're not just going for your shop, you're going for much, much more. I hate the fact that I go down some high streets now, and I have done in the past couple of weeks, and see so many boarded up and closed shops. And we need to have high streets. They are an important part of the community. So we need to do whatever we can to support that by using them. The more we turn to online shopping, the less shops there are going to be. But it's not down to us to make sure these businesses survive. All we can do is support them by buying stuff there. They've got to find new ways to attract us and to deliver the products that we want. It's a really tough time at the moment for bricks and mortar shops, at least. But they will. Shops like M&S will find ways to survive. It's slightly. They need better clothes. For years their clothes were scoffed at by fashionistas. I'm always happy I can buy a decent quality enough shirt there at a decent price. But so they know they've got this whole thing they're doing now. I think it's called We Will Survive or something. Something a bit more positive than that. I'm sure their marketing people thought up, but they will. But it's interesting times all round.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it was a few months ago they started bringing in third-party brands onto their website, again, trying to compete in that sense. So at least they're getting some customers there. And I guess while they're looking for the other name that they're keen on, they might happen upon some M&S own brand stuff as well. And yeah, that kind of evolution. And I guess that's what they're saying. They've got a £200 million loss for the last year, massive, massive loss, accelerating closure of some stores, but no staff are going to go. Apparently, they're going to be kind of reshifted to other branches. I guess there might be not going to work for everyone, but that's positive news. And as you say, changing what their the store visit is going to be like and what you get when you're there. So hopefully they will be one that can maintain, because I'm with you 100% there. I particularly over the last few years really trying to sort of shift my attention to the high street where I can, and even more so now things have reopened. Story here that's covered a few weeks ago, and it's come back, and I know this is one that you've been following quite closely as well, involving Amigo Loans. And this is where they were saying they didn't have enough money to pay the compensation for mis-selling, and they wanted to give 10 pence in the pound to their creditors. It's been thrown out by the High Court, though. So what does this mean for people who are potentially trying to get money back from Amigo?
Well, it's looking less and less likely that they'll get much. Amigo has used scare tactics to say, if you don't accept our meager compensation offers, you might get nothing. I don't think they're quite going to get away with that, because I know that there are new bosses at the company, and they're desperately trying to keep it alive, and they want to relaunch it as a more responsible lender. So there's that going on in the sort of background. The court case this week, where the judge ruled against them, was tough for the company. Their share price has slumped 60% or something, quite ridiculous. But the battle will go on to get compensation for people, because behind the scenes there are people who want to keep the company going and want to make it a going concern and want to make it a more responsible lender. So if they're going to do that, they've got to make sure they treat all these, if you like, victims in the right way.
Yeah, it's one that it's this awful sort of sense, isn't it? For some people, it's do you vote in favour of getting hardly anything back because you might get absolutely nothing back? But the scale of it, when does that become worth it? Is it sometimes worth saying no, hold out and hope you will get more? And that's obviously what the judge is saying, that they think that they can give more, and it isn't going to sort of fold completely if they don't accept this plan. So one to keep an eye on. But obviously the whole mis-selling around all sorts of high cost credit has been a big issue. And it feels like the next kind of mis-selling, or a form of mis-selling, has also hit the headlines, involves Bitcoin. And this is another story that you reported on this week in terms of an advertising campaign, an irresponsible advertising campaign on the tube for Bitcoin.
Yeah, this was an advert which was appeared last December, January, on the tube, on London buses. Basically, it said, if you're seeing Bitcoin on the tube or on the underground, it's time to buy. That's quite a strong message, and suggesting that Bitcoin has now become so mainstream that you should invest in it. Now, this is terribly irresponsible, because Bitcoin is not suitable for people who don't know what they're doing. I'm not going to slag off Bitcoin, because I know people who are sitting on a small fortune. Mm-hmm. But the time to buy Bitcoin was 2010, 2012, maybe 2014, and sit on it. And now you'd be sitting on a small fortune. Yeah. If you bought it back in January, let's say if you bought it at the end of March, say, you'd now have half the value of what you had then, because the price has plummeted in half in the past couple of weeks, partly because Elon Musk, our favourite billionaire, has said that he's not going to accept Bitcoin anymore, because he found out that the way it's mined is not necessarily good for the planet. Also, the Chinese, in China, they banned Bitcoin being used. Also, I think somewhere else, Iran has banned it as well this week. So suddenly it's not as on such a high positive trajectory as people thought. So it's not one to if you like, invest in. I don't mind people who want to take a punt on it. If you've got your savings, if you've got your investments, you've got your plans, have all that in place before you even consider Bitcoin. And then if you've got a few hundred, a few thousand, whatever it is, spare money that you can afford to lose, then take a punt on Bitcoin. If it's like 1% of your overall portfolio, that £1,000, for instance, if you leave it sitting there, ignore the ups and downs and the turmoil, come back in 10 years, you might find it's doubled or trebled or quadrupled. Some people predict it could be worth 200,000. Roughly now, I think it's dropped below 30,000. It was 60,000 a couple of weeks ago. That's the nature of this particular beast. It is still a gamble. It's not a way it's not an assured way to make money, even though plenty of people have made money out of it. And there are plenty of people you'll find on the internet saying that it is a brilliant investment. It's not. And that's why adverts like this are terribly dangerous.
So simple, wasn't it? Really, really sort of simplified it down, sort of say, look, just go and buy some. Go and do it. It's like you're buying your groceries. It's just go and do it. And that's obviously a big part of why that his advert has been sort of, withdrawn.
I don't... I worry about all advertising. What we have to remember about advertising is it's trying to persuade us to part with our money. It's not helping us. It's not informing us about something good. It's trying to trick us, if you like, into spending money on stuff. Now, I fall for that. If I see beers 3 for a £5, I think, oh, great, I'll go and buy them, even though I don't particularly want those beers, because I'm thinking, oh, I'm getting a bargain. That's just a £5 I've lost, and I will enjoy the beers, or I'll give them away to guests if they're not to my taste, But so that's a small scale. But all advertising is designed to trick us into handing over us our money. So you should take any advertising with a huge pinch of salt, and before you do anything, do some basic research. What does this mean? What will really happen? Bitcoin. Another thing that's happened this week is around something called NFTs. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. You might know, Andy.
I would say non-fungible.
Was it fungible or fungible?
Fungible. One of those two. Let's put it down to regional dialect.
Yeah, right. NFTs, in a way we call them. And these are in the news. These are basically certificates, I think, which give you authenticity to a digital artwork. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but I can tell you that tweets have been sold. The original tweet from Jack, the person who set up Twitter, sold for £2 million or dollars, and a huge amount of money for nothing. This week, it's a really charming old video that everyone must have seen. Charlie's bit my finger. You might remember that. The 2 little boys, little baby finger them out. Oh, Charlie's bit my finger. Lovely thing. That was sold for more than £500,000, £537,000. Now, that's the person who bought that didn't buy the video. They bought the right to sort of own the digital. I can't even describe it. Now, I'm not going to scoff at these, because the whole world of art is fraught with people who pay millions of pounds for something that ultimately is only worth the canvas, the paint. It's only worth a few pounds in real sense. But they feel there's value in the artwork they've got. Now, this is happening again with NFTs. The person who's bought this, who spent $537,000, believes that he or she will be able to sell it at a future date for $1 million or $2 million. That's why they're doing it. They're not buying it to actually own a beautiful piece of art. They're taking a punt. Yeah. And it could be a good punt. And these are linked through the blockchain. I'm very careful what I'm saying here, because I don't want to sound too stupid, but the blockchain technology is encrypted and stuff. It's what Bitcoin's all built on, and NFTs are built on the same. So Charlie bit my finger can't be sold again, because it's all safe and secure. Now, if you buy into all that, then it could be a good investment. I wouldn't touch them. Oddly enough, the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, warned about ads for NFTs as well recently, because you can see these things going for big money and even think, well, I'll get into this, I'll buy something. It's a huge risk. It's a basic gamble. Again, it's not an investment.
But it shows also, and this brings us on to the next story, shows the kind of the power, the increasing kind of influence of digital media. £500,000 for what is a less than 60-second homemade video. And obviously that's, bigger and bigger and bigger. Concerns of how that's going to sort of impact the traditional media forms. And one area that people were really worried about with the reopening, would people return, was the cinema. But actually it's been good news, probably helped by the bad weather, but people have returned to the cinemas.
Yeah, well, let's face it, people are desperate for any form of entertainment. And cinemas, they've all introduce new ways of going. I mean, you still sit in a seat, you still buy your popcorn, you still watch the big screen, but you can sit next to your friend or partner, but then no one else can sit near you. You have to wash your hands. You have to do all these things. You have to wear a mask while you're watching the film, unless you're eating your popcorn. So obviously buy some popcorn so you can take your mask off. I think the fact is millions of people are starved of entertainment and culture. So they flock back to see, I have to tell you, some really dreadful films at the cinemas at the moment.
Peter Rabbit 2.
Because, because the cinemas, they haven't wanted, the movie makers, they haven't wanted to put up the big films because they're worried that no one will come see it. So the next James Bond, which is called No Time to Die, originally planned for April 2020, put back to October 2020. I think it's then put back to May 2021 this month. It's now due in September 2021. So big films they don't want to risk. They want to wait until they can get millions back in. So there's some rubbish films at the moment. People are queuing up to go and see them. As you said, Peter Rabbit too. Peter Rabbit was a dreadful.
It really was, wasn't it?
But the second one has been much more popular because there's nothing else on and people are desperate for some entertainment. I really hope cinemas survive this. They are such a joy. If you used to watching movies on the telly, I tell you what, they're nowhere near as good as on the big screen, and that experience. I watch films at home, and what happens is one of my member of my family will say, "Oh, can we pause this so I can go and get a cup of tea or something?" Which is fine. But then you lose the whole thing of being involved in it. In a cinema, lights are out and you just focus on the screen. It's much more immersive and enjoyable experience.
It really is. And I'm the same as you. I'm a huge film fan. And actually, even before the pandemic happened, my big sort of treat to myself when we moved house was to buy a projector and a really good sort of surround sound system. And it's not the same as a proper cinema, but it has been an absolute sort of lifesaver over the last sort of 15, 16 months. It has paid for itself because I've not been buying cinema tickets or anything like that. And it's been amazing. But I'm still really keen, particularly some of these big releases which have been held up this year. As long as things carry on, we are going to see more blockbusters than probably any other year. And they're not going to be around in the cinemas as long because the next one's coming along. So hopefully I think that will continue getting people, including myself, to the proper cinemas. Although you mentioned James Bond's new movie, that produced by MGM. This week, MGM has announced that it's going to be sold to Amazon. So there's still going to be this continued spectre of those streaming giants and that kind of relationship we have with a movie because, that means that more films are going to go to Amazon now. Netflix has already done a lot of these sort of premieres. Disney doing a lot of that this year. So it is certainly one, as with everything this year, so much change, such a one to keep an eye on. But fingers crossed, I'm hoping that cinema is one that does sort of keep going from strength to strength.
One thing I would say, there's a lot of films now are opening in cinemas and on the same day on Netflix or Amazon or whatever else. So you just think, well, why pay to go to cinema? I've got a season ticket to my cinema. It works out really cheap if you go regularly, and it's such a much better experience seeing these films at the cinema. So, I think my local cinema charges £15 or something a ticket. With a season ticket, you're reducing it to £3 or £4 if you go regularly, which I, not at the moment, but which I do in normal times. And then you can see all these films and enjoy them as they're meant to be seen. It's just great entertainment. So most of the big chains do season tickets, and they're not very expensive. You're talking 20 quid a month or something. Yeah. And that way you can go twice a week. You're reducing the cost of these films to £2.50. And it's just really worth doing. I think it's a great money saving tip. As long as you like the cinema, but who doesn't like films?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this summer as well, we've got a lot of sport going on. Hopefully the weather will pick up. It will be interesting to see how things do compete, the big releases, your Marvels and whatever that are coming along with that. But I think we'll be all right. And obviously, hopefully at some point, the social distancing will go as well, and it'll be even more packed, because if you get a good film and a good atmosphere, it is a lovely experience. We've got time for one last story here, and it's the Sunday Times Rich List. It's always fun to look for the movie stars and the musicians and the celebrities on there when it comes through, the names you recognise. But if you're actually looking at the really rich people, the billionaires, very, very few of them are going to be household names. Dyson, you'll know. Abramovich, because because of Chelsea, and one or two others. But generally, these people, they're super, super, super rich, and they've been getting richer, haven't they, as well?
Yeah, the pandemic has been tough for lots of people. We do hear that people have saved money up because they haven't been going out, but that's the people who can afford to go out. And there's a lot more people who've struggled. So while that's been going on, and people have got furlough and some losing their jobs and all these things happening, the richest people have been getting richer and richer and richer. And the new number one richest person in the world is a guy called Sir Leonard Blavatnik, I think it's pronounced. Now, he's an oil and media, he's a Ukrainian bloke. Oil and media, made his money from the old Russian events in the 90s, let's say. And he made, in the last year, well, from April to March, he made £7 billion to increase his fortune to 23 billion. That's massive, almost an extra third he made. That's partly he sold a big chunk of his ownership of Warner, the media company. But it's that I still feel a bit uncomfortable when I see the rich just getting richer and richer and richer, and the rest of us, I don't feel any richer. It's true, I haven't been going out as much, so I do have a few more savings, but not anything like that.
It's one of those things that, again, a story that kind of creeped up a lot since I've been doing this format on the pod since January. This divide, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It's continuing. And to see the top 250 people in the UK worth 16.3% more than they were a year ago, that's a huge amount of wealth that is kind of going one way. And probably won't cover it in detail now, but there was another story that's come through about growing support for more money to be given to universal credit. This extra £20 uplift that's been there temporarily to make this permanent, and more people are supportive of that, which is great. But it's nothing compared to this money, which is coming in at the top end, and I think this is, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. This isn't like a blip. This is kind of just accelerate and give the rich more and more money, to the detriment of those people who are struggling. There was a nice element though to finish off the show, the giving list, the people who are giving money, and that was sort of really nice to see some of the people exactly how much of their wealth they're actually giving away.
Well, you only have to look at Marcus Rashford. Now, I'm not a Man United fan. I mean, I'll go so far as to say I hate Man United, but you can't help but admire this young man. He's earning lots of money. I mean, you can have an argument about whether footballers earn too much money. I think, there's a lot of money in football, the same in films and stuff. So why shouldn't the best, the highest earn, why shouldn't they earn a lot of money? But what he's doing, putting so much back into by helping people with the children and meals and everything else, it's just incredible. And I would hope, and I feel the same about you, Andy, that if we were earning, I don't know, 5 million a year, I would say, well, I can get by with $1 million. Whoa, easily. Well, it's 4 million I can use to help. Obviously, I'm ignoring whatever tax or whatever else I'm trying to avoid. But I think personally, I could get by on 1,000 a week really quite comfortably. I think anyone could. You could eat well, you could entertain yourself well, all that kind of stuff. So anything above that, then you should be thinking, how can I use this to help others? I would. I'm not, I might not give the majority of my money away, but I would be thinking about, I guess, probably starting some kind of businesses to help communities, whatever. Being sensible about it. Getting involved and that kind of stuff. But when rich people don't do that, they just accumulate more. Someone like Marcus Rashford, he's had a hugely hard life, and he's come through, and he's such an inspiration. It's an inspiration for old buggers like me. He must be an inspiration for the young people, and it's great finally having a footballer who's inspiring rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and he's top of the list. He's given away 125% of his wealth, which obviously he's raised a lot of extra money, which is why Harry was able to do that. But that's really phenomenal, and particularly for someone so young. Let alone the fact that he's an industry which normally say has a bad rep. Also in that top 10 is Jordan Henderson, giving away a decent chunk of his fortune in the last year, and I think that kind of puts to shame a lot of the others who say extra £7 billion this year. Well, did he need an extra 7 billion? That could have done a huge amount of great work. Simon, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. We could have keep talking forever, I'm sure. But if people want to find you on social media and get your daily movie and beer recommendations, how do they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Simon N. Reed. I'm on Instagram at simon.reed. That's READ in both instances.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Really good to chat.
Now, if you want to read more about any of the stories Simon and I have just been discussing, do head over to becleverwithyourcash.com/cashchats198. I'll also link to that below. And within that article, you will find URLs to click through to and read the full articles that we based our discussion on. Now, don't forget also that this is normally part of my podcast. I do 2 episodes every week. Only the Friday episode is here on YouTube. So if you want to get both episodes of Cash Chats, just head over to your favorite podcasting app, search for the pod, hit subscribe or follow, and you'll get that downloaded every time you open up the app. I'll link to both of those below in the notes so you don't miss out. Until next time, cheers. And here are a couple more videos you might find interesting.